I do not know what to say at this point in time because, according to my phone, I am connected. I'm trying to. Yeah, you suppose it's causing this. Let's try again. Now, nope, nothing's coming through. Let me try reconnecting my phone. Let's try reconnecting again. All right, we'll see if there. All right, now there's a connection. All right, I'm going to stop this recording and start it again. For those of you on the stream, welcome. Glad to have you here this morning. Just a small technical difficulty. I don't know why, but it looks like it dropped my phone signal there to begin with. So welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell. I will be here for an hour this morning. That should be continuing where we kind of left off yesterday, for that matter, for just a general understanding of what is going on. But low in sound. I don't know why. But probably the volume, Paul. Probably the volume at the station is turned down. But as I look at the recording screen here, the signal looks pretty strong. Well, it did. Now it's gone down. Well, part of the problem with remote transmission, it's probably been a good 2 years since I have been in the studio. So I deeply appreciate the ability to broadcast my program from my home. All right, so let's go on here. Enough excuses. This past month, two teams of human beings have reached into the two ends of the universe at once. In the hills of southern China, the Juno Observatory, which is a 20,000-ton sphere of liquid scintillator, watched by more than 43,000 light sensors, 650 meters underground, caught the near weightless flicker of the neutrino, and in just 59 days of operation, measured the laws governing that rather ghostly particle more precisely than all prior experiments of recent decades combined. And in those same weeks, the LIGO-Virgo-CAGRA collaboration, published in the latest catalog of gravitational waves, some 390 collisions of black holes and neutron stars have now been recorded, which are ripples in the fabric of space-time itself. One of them traced to a merger of a black hole and a neutron star more than 3 billion light years away. 10 years ago, we had detected one. Now, why am I bringing this up? Why? Because our species is the only one we know of that reaches past our own senses to grasp the very large and the very small, and then change the universe by what we learn. Now, I want to measure what I just said, and this is all prelude. Prolegomena. I want to measure the present against the image of mankind. Now, I want to repeat again. 650 meters. That's six football fields. More than 6 football fields. Deep in the earth, in southern China, this observatory, which is a 20,000-ton sphere of a liquid scintillator, it counts, watched by more than 40,000 light sensors, caught neutrinos are almost weightless, not quite like photons, but almost. Caught the little flicker of these neutrinos. What was 2012? If you remember the end of the world movie 2012, it was all based on the fact that neutrinos coming from somewhere had greatly upset the energy balance of the planet, and that's what triggered all of the surface destruction that was taking place, that the movie was based on. And finally, the end of the earth as we know it. A few survived. But we have been searching for neutrinos for a long time. I don't completely understand that. But here, what kind of money, what kind of engineering, what kind of technology excellence and brilliance had to go into the creation of this that the Communist Party of China did, where they were able to count 390 collisions of black holes and neutron stars, where a decade ago we had detected only one. Now, with that on one side of the ping pong table, on the other side of the ping pong table, in Switzerland, the first round of the U.S.-Iran negotiations under the 14-point Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding concluded yesterday at the Bergenstock Resort, mediated by Qatar and Pakistan, with the U.S. and Iran not yet quite speaking directly. And they agreed on this roadmap to a final deal within 60 days of a high-level committee to oversee it, and most consequentially, a deconfliction cell, they call it, to ensure the end of military operations in Lebanon, which Iran's foreign minister called the first real test of the negotiations. That test is already underway. Israel refuses to leave southern Lebanon. And according to Prime Minister Netanyahu, quote, nothing will change that. While Iran has tied the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to a genuine Israeli-Lebanese ceasefire. So the potential for peace is real, but it's very, very fragile. Now, the thing I'm trying to point out here is, on the one hand, we're counting neutrinos. I suspect to some degree, because we are bombarded with neutrinos all the time, that there's an energy factor there. Now, we all know the stories of Tesla and the energy that's in the atmosphere. Where's that energy coming from? The relationship between oxygen and nitrogen? Well, of course not. O2 is rather stable. Nitrogen is very stable. That's not what's creating the free energy that's in the atmosphere that Tesla discovered. Might it be what is coming from the cosmic center? Might it be what's coming from the galactic center? Might it be what is coming from our sun? Tesla found a way to trap it. Free energy. His experiments in Colorado, experiments that were done out in Wendover, pulling raw energy out of the atmosphere. Who ever heard of such a thing? And yet here's what the Chinese are doing trying to harness the energy of neutrinos. Imagine this stuff that's been here since the dawn of time, blasting through our atmosphere, energizing our atmosphere to the point where Tesla found a way to pull it out, energizing the surface of the earth so that life is abundant, the flow of electrons across the surface of the planet abundant, one of the sources of life. And on the other hand, genocide rules in the Middle East. Now, even if this memorandum of understanding should hold, the damage is already done and it's spreading. By energy market reckoning, some 15 million barrels a day of oil and its energy equivalent in liquefied natural gas is going to continue to be missing daily in the daily supply, well into 2027, depressing an economy already enmeshed in the everything bubble of leveraged debt and derivatives. I don't know a whole lot about the financial end of that. I don't know a whole lot about leveraging debt. I'm trying to leverage my debt. I'm not getting very far with it. But the effects are going to be felt, as they so often do, by the poorest. The 1%, the top 10% are not going to be hurt by this that much. And the UN's latest hunger hotspots report warns that hundreds of millions of human beings face deepening hunger even as food and humanitarian aid is slashed. And the same species that built this Juno in southern China is the same species that's saying there's not going to be enough food in another year. This is the contradiction of the moment. The species that can read the collisions of black holes 3 billion years gone away is told by the managers of a dying system that it can't afford to house its young, feed the hungry, or build a railway across the desert. And the problem here is a failure of policy, not a failure of capability, a failure of political policies, a failure of financial policies, a failure of diplomatic policies, controlled by the 1%. Not a failure of technology or know-how. The refusal to recognize the indivisible nature of security and economic development of all nations. And what Iran is insisting upon for relatively helpless Lebanon, and of course through Lebanon for the majority of the global South, is what Pope Leo XIV's encyclical Magnifica Humanitas states for all of mankind: that no people may climb to heaven on a tower built by kicking out the ladder from the poor. The Pope entitled his encyclical Magnificent Humanity. And the neutrino detector and the gravitational wave catalog are examples of what that means. A fact about a creature said to be made in the image of the Creator, unlike any other beast on this planet. Civilization organized around the truth would treat the development of every nation as the natural extension of the same creative power that built this Juno. And a civilization that denies the truth of human nature makes war on reservoirs and lets hundreds of millions go hungry. Which of these is, the decision is being made now in the negotiating rooms at Lucerne on this 60-day clock running towards a final deal at this moment in time. I think the universe yields its deepest principles to those that reach for its extremes. So the first session of this high-level U.S.-Iran negotiations under the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, concluded yesterday at the Bergenstock Resort in Switzerland. Participating, of course, Iran, the United States, and the two mediating parties, Qatar and Pakistan. And in a joint statement by Pakistan's Foreign Office, the mediators reported encouraging progress, a positive and constructive atmosphere, including agreement on a roadmap to a final deal within 60 days. That's the headline. You notice Israel wasn't there. Israel has no intention of a peace deal because they have no intention of pulling their armed forces out of southern Lebanon, where even some of their generals are locked inside of tanks because of the ambushes set up by Hezbollah. This is just madness. So the parties agree to establish this high-level committee to oversee the mediation. And the chief negotiators reporting to it regularly are supposedly going to lead these working groups on three different tracks: the nuclear track, the sanctions track, and some monitoring dispute resolution group to ensure that the memorandum of understanding is implemented. And in a communication line, you know what this, to me, this is like the NFL, the National Football League, getting together to decide some new rules in football, national football. What is there, like 32 teams or something like that? I don't remember exactly. And not inviting the coaches to the meeting to change the rules of the game, or not inviting the owners of the teams to change the rules. Maybe I'm missing something here. I just can't understand how they can sit down and have these kinds of meetings between the United States. Bruce is asking, is there any way I can turn the volume up? I think the volume is turned down at the office, the radio office. I'm sorry that it's very difficult to hear me. My volume control here let me see if this helps any. Now, let's see if this helps any. That's the only volume thing that I can do here that might make a change. And Bruce, thanks. I'm glad somebody's missing this. That somebody's listening. Because these things are just so important. So anyway, this communication line was established for the period covered by paragraph 5 of this memorandum of understanding to avoid incidents and secure safe passage of commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. And the most consequential step in this agreement is what they call the deconfliction cell among the parties, Lebanon, and the mediators to enforce the termination of military operations in Lebanon. And Iran's foreign minister called this cell the first real test of the negotiations. And it's going to be tested at once. Because Lebanon overshadowed the talks from start to finish. That's what that was the press release. It overshadowed the talks. Overshadowed it in which way? Well, Israel wasn't there, for one thing. Israel was not invited to these discussions. The discussions centered on the United States and Iran, because Iran knows who's behind this. Israel could not survive without the United States. So it's going to be tested because as the negotiators had gathered in Switzerland, President Trump threatened on Truth Social to bomb Iran over Hezbollah. We'll hit Iran very hard again, only harder. As if I would just move closer to the mic, it worked. What you're saying is I've got to hold the phone directly in front of my mouth. Does that help any? Anyway, Trump was threatening there over the weekend to bomb Iran over Hezbollah. We'll hit Iran very hard, only harder, even as Vice President Vance at the negotiating table, said Trump had asked us to turn over a new leaf with Iran. So the vice president is saying, we're offering this peace deal. We want to turn over a new leaf with Iran, while President Trump is threatening to hit them harder than ever. And then threatening the negotiating team from Iran, you may not make it home alive. And then the chief, Galibaf, the chief negotiator from Iran, is saying, well, we don't count U.S. threats for anything. So the hinge is Israel's refusal to leave Lebanon. And Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed Saturday he was going to hold the security zone as long as necessary, and nothing's going to change it, which was a direct shot at Trump because Trump had just told Netanyahu to change it. Then Iran answers by tying the Strait of Hormuz to Lebanon. We're not going to open up the strait until you pull out of Lebanon. And so the sources say if Washington can't deliver the end of military operations in Lebanon, this is from the MOU. Clause 1, the strait's reopening, and then Clause 5, it will not be implemented. So shipping data bore out the threat that only one small tanker transited with its transponder on after Iran's announcement versus dozens in the recent days. And so technical talks will continue through the week at Bergenstock, even though the head negotiators have left. What a mess. And why am I talking about this? Today's an election day for primaries in Utah. Why am I not talking about that? Well, you see who's running? Just more of the same. Anyway, a little bit about Ukraine for a moment. Ukraine's drone campaign against the fuel lifelines of Crimea escalated sharply over the weekend. And in a qualitative new development, Ukraine has reached, with cruise missiles, some 300 kilometers now inside Russia. Now, what was talked about as a possibility a year ago is now happening. And what did Putin threaten? Whoever made those cruises are now targets. Now, overnight, June 20th to 21st, this Friday and Saturday night, the Ukrainian drones struck the ferry crossing and oil terminals on both sides of the Kerch Strait, which is that route Russia has relied on to fuel the Crimea since the Crimean bridge was closed to hazardous cargo. And the Terminal 1 oil depot in Kerch, less than a kilometer from the bridge, and a tank farm at Port Kavkaz on the eastern side were set ablaze. And the Maritime Executive, which is where I'm getting this, reported 5 of 7 tanks burning at the Kerch terminal. And a Rosmorport rail ferry, the Elena II, was hit, taking ferry service out of commission. And the Institute for the Study of War citing the geolocated footage, claimed at least 3 ferries were set ablaze and air defenses guarding the bridge disabled. Claims not independently confirmed. Krasnodar officials said one person was killed on the ferry. End quote. Now, the effect, of course, was immediate. A day later, on Saturday, Sergei Askionov, who's the head of Crimea, suspended all retail fuel sales. Quote, fuel will be sold only to government agencies that ensure the functioning and security of the Republic of Crimea. And he urged residents to remain calm and to only trust official sources. So the ban on civilian purchases came after weeks of worsening shortages. Since last May, according to Associated Press, sales had been rationed to 20 liters per vehicle per week via prepaid coupons, with hours-long lines and speculators reselling at double price. It is the worst energy crisis in Crimea since it became part of Russia in 2014. And it's because Ukrainian drones took out various fuel transport and fuel storage depots that has caused this to happen. Now, Ukraine considers the Crimea Ukraine. Ukraine voted to become part, Crimea voted to become part of the Russian Federation 12 years ago. And that same campaign now reaches beyond that peninsula, because overnight, June 22nd to 21st, or 21st, 22nd, Ukraine struck the city of Vorozhna with air-launched cruise missiles, hitting the Vrezna semiconductor devices plant, which Ukraine's general staff called a critical component of Russian defense production. And then the governor, Alexander Gusev, confirmed the plant was damaged. Russian authorities later said 5 people were killed. Some 10 apartment buildings are damaged. The Russian telegram channels attributed the strike to UK Storm Shadow missiles, though neither Kyiv nor Russian officials specified the type. So, does Putin mean what Putin said when Putin said anybody that supplies this equipment to the Ukraine that requires the technical abilities of the supplying agent in order for them to operate? In other words, the Ukrainians can't do it in and of themselves. Not that they're dumb, they just don't have the technical expertise and the satellite guidance systems, also supplied by the United States, to guide these cruise missiles to their targets. Putin said that makes the supplier of these legitimate targets of the Russian Federation military. Now, I talked about this some months ago. I can't remember exactly when. But there are 2 or 3 places in the UK where these things are being manufactured. And then they're finally assembled in Ukraine. But the major parts of them are assembled in different parts of the UK, the Storm Shadow. Will Putin make good his threat and target those places in the UK? So these escalations follow the Zelensky's European tour, his June 7th meeting in London, his presence at the G7 summit, and then in Brussels with the NATO defense ministers and the Ukraine Defense Contract Group. What the hell are they still listening to this man? Well, the world is still hanging on a cliff. However, there are, at least on one front of this double-edged danger, meaning the Middle East and Ukraine, a world plunging into a global crisis, there is a certain amount of progress, namely on the Iranian front, where there are some rather nerve-wracking back and forth accusations and messages and insults. Nevertheless, over the weekend, the U.S. and Iranian delegations, as I said, met in Bergenstock in Switzerland, and they did agree to work on a memorandum of understanding. So you had J.D. Vance and the two real estate agents, Witkoff and Kushner, on the U.S. side. On the Iranian side, Galibaf and Nagrachi, and various other top people from the Iranian side. Also, the negotiating countries, Qatar and Pakistan, had leading people there, and they had published this joint declaration whereby they, after very intense discussions, agreed that there would be a task force that would work out the details on various points. So within 60 days, a final agreement is supposed to be worked out. Now just think about that for a minute. As I've been harping here over and over again, Israel wasn't present at this. Iran is looking to the United States to be the governing force that can stop this, because the United States, with a phone call, can stop sending bombs and bullets and tanks and all the other stuff involved with military support to Israel to stop it. Because Israel can't continue this. Now, they get a lot of help from Germany, but Germany alone can't support the war effort of Iran. So obviously, the big cloud holding over top of all of this, as I said, is Lebanon, which, according to Iran, is the real test. If you're really speaking to the United States, and these are my words, not Agrachi or Galibaf, if you really want this thing to work, you've got to pull in Israel. Because we are not going to open the Strait of Hormuz until they stop their advance into Lebanon and pull out of Lebanon. Not just south of the Litani, but pull out of Lebanon. And it's very clear that Israel has no intention whatsoever to cease its operations in Lebanon, nor on the concept of the greater Israel. I mean, that I don't even think that needs to be said, but in any case, obviously it's a major step forward rather than joining the large chorus of cynics and doubters and basically naysayers, of which there are many. As thin and fragile as the chance may be, it's potentially an area where a breakthrough might be able to be accomplished, but the only thing which will what's going to outflank the hardened Israeli resistance, because once you've had several countries of the region determined to go in the direction of the extended Oasis plan, it would impact the situation inside of Israel. So it seems that the pushing of the extended Oasis plan is an absolute non-negotiable ingredient to make this whole thing stick. Now, as I said, the Israeli opposition to leave the so-called security zone, what they call the security zone in Lebanon, which is naturally Lebanese territory. And the reason why Hezbollah is continuously fighting there is because of the Israeli attacks that are going on against the Lebanese citizenry. That's why it's often been referred to as the Gazification of Lebanon, to continue the genocide in Lebanon in Gaza, now in Lebanon. Nevertheless, that's the contested area, and not only Netanyahu said they're absolutely not going to leave, so did the IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, who said that the military objective in southern Lebanon remains clear and unchanged, defending the northern communities and the citizens of Israel. And then Defense Minister Katz, all dyed-in-the-wool Zionists, mind you, of course. Defense Minister Katz said that the Israeli soldiers are free to act without restriction to eliminate threats in Lebanon. Free to act without, which is what they did in Gaza, by the shooting of over 100, now that they have been counted, the shooting of over 100 children in the head by snipers. But not one of those children survived, Mike. to do whatever is necessary to eliminate the threats in Lebanon. So you can see that that tone of voice is the big obstacle here. And the big question naturally remains is Trump, who reportedly is getting very annoyed with Israel and very annoyed with Netanyahu, trying to ruin his election chances at the midterm elections. Will he finally put down both feet instead of one foot and put the reins on Netanyahu to make sure that he's not exploding this memorandum of understanding? And that has a lot to do naturally with what is going on inside of this country and internationally. So it's not a simple question. It just shows you this situation is definitely a chance, but it does require some very strong follow-up because this whole thing still hangs in the air. Because Iran is not going to give up its position without movement on Israel south across the border. And Israel has said, pound sand, we're not leaving. And should we not forget that this was also featured in the new various warnings that the economic consequences of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, in the best of all cases, even if it were to be opened up for the flow of oil, the flow of liquid natural gas, the flow of helium, the flow of the fertilizer materials, will still take until the beginning of 2027 to regain ground, given the fact that the whole chain of events from exploiting, basically developing the oil, putting it into transport, putting it into ships, shipping the tankers to the place of destination, and thereon whatever facilities it has to be shipped to be used in production. This is a long and tedious process. It's not just like running down to the store and picking up some buns and hot dogs for your backyard barbecue that you forgot about. Should they reopen the refineries? Should they reopen the production sites when the missiles can hit them? In any case, this is as was referred to as the sword of Damocles over the whole world economy, not just over the economy, which it could put into a depression, but into financial collapse. Now, remember that Trump had said in one interview that what really motivated him was to go forward with this was, as I mentioned yesterday, a danger of the repetition of 1929, and he did not want to become a new President Hoover. And he said that the oil reserves internationally were only there for 4 weeks. So this is all on a very short leash at the moment. And that's why any more delays could really put this whole thing over the edge. And that is what needs to be communicated. Now, the Iranians obviously are linking the status of the Strait of Hormuz to the Lebanon ceasefire. And one can actually observe on an hourly basis how that's going on, because if the attacks in Lebanon continue, the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. And the march towards the blowout of the international financial economic system is moving right along with that. Now, there's an interesting article by Ralph Boschard in Global Bridge, which basically comments from his point of view also the fact that Trump did not want to go to Switzerland to sign the agreement, but for grander reasons, of course, he decided to give his signature in the palace at Versailles. He basically declared that it is a de facto clear that Iran is the winner in all of this, because Iran is closing the Strait of Hormuz, and it's bad enough that genocide against Lebanese citizens continues. But it's Iran who holds the trump card, pun intended. Now, I think I've hammered that enough. On a different topic, time we got. Yesterday, Prime Minister Keir Starmer officially announced his resignation. Not much lost, of course, but it clearly shows the short duration of the life expectancy of all of these governments in Europe who claim that they're the E3 or the E5 or the E whatever. In any case, Starmer's out, and he will remain as a transition position until his succession is totally clear. But it seems that the only contestant or contender is the former Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham, who on all crucial points, what he has said to say about the Ukraine, what he has said about Israel, what about militarization, if anything, is worse than Keir Starmer. So one might not expect real advantageous improvement there. And then the other big topic that I mentioned a little bit earlier is the situation around the Ukraine. There is some huge hype that with this largest Ukraine drone attack against Russia since the beginning of this war, there are a lot, there's a lot of articles hardly able to hide the FAZ is saying drone hail showers on Russia. The Bild Zeitung says Moscow's attacks shame Putin's regime. Oh, it's just very, very stupid warmongering. Now, Russia was hit severely. There's no doubt about it. There were, on the 18th of June, 10 Avia bombs, 3 HIMARS, 4 Ukrainian. There were some cruise missiles of the type Flamingo, 992 drones. In any case, the Russian army answered that with strikes on Ukrainian military objects, soldiers, mercenaries in 142 different regions. So in Russia, there were hits on shopping centers in the south of Moscow. Several Moscow airports were hit. They were all closed for several hours. 527 airliners were hit at these airports. And then a refinery in the southern part of Moscow. So this is obviously serious, but the situation is absolutely not decisively changed. It's just that the Western Schadenfreude is really unlimited. Now, Ukraine has announced, this is yesterday or the day before, that they want to build another 10 million drones. And it's generally noted by the Western media that when Putin, who was at the day of the refinery attack in Moscow, at a conference of the ASEAN, 600 kilometers away, he made no comment on the drone attacks. And a lot of media, including German TV, said that with Putin in Kazan, not one word concerning the major attack on the refinery in Russia means that Russia must be weak. Now, that may be a big blow, but to assume that the largest, most advanced nuclear power on the planet is going to be defeated by such little needle sticks is completely insane. And then there's a comment by Pavel Zarubin interviewing Yuri Yushakov, who's a very close advisor of Putin, by basically saying that, at the moment, the one side remains committed to the understanding discussed in Anchorage, while on the other side, apparently, we can now say, he said, that has been proven unable to complete this part of the process and fulfill the agreements. He said, we're not waiting for these understandings or agreements to be fulfilled. We're waiting for victory. We're waiting for our own goals to be realized. Now, it seems to me that the continuous attitude in the Iran case against Israel not being curbed by the United States, and in the Ukraine case by the Western backing of Ukraine, that both Russia and Iran have come to the conclusion that there are many statements to back this up, that you cannot trust the West, and that you have to take care of your own security militarily. And that is what I think is going to happen maybe even this week. Because if that coincides with the ongoing Damocles threat hanging over the entire world economy and the world financial system, it'll lead to a blowout in the short term. I mean, I'm really talking weeks, maybe months. Then it will come to that, to what, with unforeseeable consequences for the strategic instability, world war, danger, and depression. I mean, these people are really insane to keep driving this game to the edge, but that's what it looks like is happening right now. Now, I'm going to put a thought in your head. I wish it were a happier thought. If there is, by some stretch of the imagination, truth to the Epstein documents, that they have not been released because not only implications of members of the Oval Office of the White House and the following blackmailing pressure brought to bear to make sure the files are not released. And that, remember at the very beginning, a couple of years ago when they first started talking about this, or maybe it was as recently as last spring, a year ago, when they talked about releasing the documents, and all of these CEOs of various corporations retired, got out of the picture quickly. Is it the Epstein class that's in control of all of this, or is there a group behind the Epstein class? Is there something more powerful than that? You know, it's just like the Rothschild banking system. There's a more powerful operation behind that. The Rothschilds are the clerks of a much deeper, darker, more evil, sinister group of controllers. And so maybe, you know, that Epstein might not be the only one catching people on videos and pictures in compromising positions. What if the military-industrial complex had already done the same thing decades ago? What if the international banking cartels had already done the same thing decades ago? What if diplomatic groups or the CIA, MI6, certainly they have. It's not all Epstein stuff. So why do you see the leaders of these powerful nations acting like they are right now against the future of mankind? Who stands to gain from this? Who would be benefited by the end of the current financial system being replaced by something else? An international war. Well, I don't have to answer that because the answer just showed up in the middle of your head if it wasn't already there. And I think, unfortunately, because so many think tanks, I mean, I don't know if they really think or if they're out getting photographs of people, including the Council on Foreign Relations, Foreign Affairs, various think tank groups in Great Britain, also in Germany. In Germany, the Institute for Economy. The Institute for World Economy just had a publication in a letter to their membership that said, "End game, Russia's war economy reaches its limits." And then they basically predict that Russia is weakening terribly, and it shows that Russia is not going to be able to carry on through this. Another one talked about how Russia is a fake giant and what is following out. In any case, the debate over the so-called Russian weakness of the economy is everywhere. And it's not substantiated because the hits on these crucial infrastructure elements do not mean that the Russian economy is hampered. There are, by the way, similar reports of the Chinese economy weakening. They only have 5% growth. Oh, the China economy is in trouble. They only had 5% growth. You show me one country in the European Union that had 5% growth. If, however, you know, a topic for the EU in their recent meeting following the G7, they had another EU meeting, and there was apparently some big quarrel about who's going to take over the leadership in respect to resolving the Ukraine situation, where Merz naturally is saying that he wants to be the one who decides where this is going. And then when Costa Holy smoke, where did the time go? The EU Council President basically made an initiative to open up diplomatic channels with the Kremlin. Which, of course, completely freaked out Merz. And then when Costa's attempt was not coordinated, it was somewhat unprofessional. Now it's not the right time for discussions. Macron got all angry for different reasons because he'd already, this last spring, sent his own emissary to Moscow. Then there's the E3, Germany, France, and Great Britain, who also want to lead, but not that it's liked by Poland and Italy, who feel excluded. And so they want the E5 instead of the E3, which includes Poland and Italy. I mean, it's just a bunch of chihuahuas barking and screaming and looking at somebody's leg to bite, as chihuahuas do. And then I could go on, but I don't want to spread this ensuing insanity to my listening audience. I mean, here we are moving into summer. Look at all the wildfires. I'm looking out the window here in my broadcast room, and the smoke is just, I mean, it almost looks like January's fog. We got enough problems here in this state, and it's election day. And if you are voting in the primary, in which we average about 17 to 18% response in this state to primary voting, make your vote count. Did you check to see where your candidate stands on Zionism? Did you check to see if your candidate gets anything from AIPAC? That might be worth considering. Tomorrow's going to be a health program. Only 1 hour. I've decided to do the same thing on Wednesdays that I do Monday and Tuesday from 8 to 9, just 1 hour. I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. I'm getting very tired. And I've only got 1 hour for tomorrow, but it'll be information packed. It'll be worth listening to. Now, saw a new person yesterday. I think I got another new one today, taking advantage of this special. And if all hell breaks loose this coming fall or winter, you want your nervous system in top operational perfection. And that's what we do. Consultations are free, but you got to schedule it. You would do that at 801-523-1890. 801-523-1890. I know money is getting harder to come by. The price of gas is continually fluctuating around, but if this thing is not solved quickly in Lebanon, you're going to see a lot more expensive gas than you see right now, especially when the reserves run out. And that's where a lot of the gas in this country is coming from, because it's not coming through the Strait of Hormuz. It's coming out of the vast reserves in the southern part of the states, especially Louisiana, from the salt mines. Now, on a happier note, the world that you see is a reflection of your own reality. You make your own reality. I can look at this and not be depressed. I look at this as a not a magnifying glass, maybe a telescope of what's coming, that I can prepare in all the different ways I can against this social Darwinist agenda. Anyway, Lowell is coming up here in a moment. I'm going to stop this recording right now so I can quickly save it and turn the program over to Lowell. And those of you on the stream, thank you for your attention. Like and subscribe wherever you can. Share so we can increase these numbers. I will see you all tomorrow there.